Greeting everyone, this is Fadi, and welcome back to a continuation of this video series called The Qibla Dilemma. Last time we began to explore and respond to some of the objections raised against the data collected by our brother Dan Gibson, and we started it with one objection by Dr. David King's. And today we're going to continue with another objection related to Dr. King as well. With me here virtually in studios, our dear brother, Dan Gibson. Dan, welcome back.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're talking about Dr. David King and his explanation, which was that randomly people picked things up and went back. So it's a question of randomness versus direction or purpose, or that, you know, there's some systematic something happening with these qiblas.
Right.
And so it's very interesting that two scholarly papers have now been written on this topic. Dr. Shum has published one, How Accurately Could Early Muslims Determine the Direction of Prayers, that is, of qiblas. And that was published in 2020, and it was followed this year by a new paper that's just come out, a statistical analysis of early Islamic history and the Qibla, comparing the theories of David King and Dan Gibson. That was published in the Journal of Archaeology and Anthropology, and that should be just out now or coming out. And these papers will appear on my website, which is known as nabatea.net. And that will be written somewhere on the screen or on the information that is attached with this video. In conclusion, let me sum up Dr. King's argument this way, that Muslims of the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries, he said, did not have the ability to accurately determine a Qibla direction. It was guesswork. They were simply trying to do it, and they hadn't smelled the sweet aroma of mathematics yet, as we quoted from Bezdawi, so they didn't know quite how to do it accurately. And so Dr. King seems to have accepted Bezdawi's view and just said that this is the way it was. Now, we challenge that thinking through, is God the author of confusion and asking them to do something they didn't know how to do, and people were just praying and doing their best trying to figure it out? Or does it mean that Qibla doesn't matter? As some people have tried to say, well, the Qibla is east or west, it's somewhere in between. And so they use that rather vague statement to try to make it out that maybe it doesn't matter in what direction you pray. Or did something happen? Was there something systematically going on that they could set their Qibla direction? And Dr. King challenged me in his papers, and he said, so explain how they did it before they had mathematics. And so in response to that, I found the answer, and the easiest way to find answers is to go to Dr. King's own writings, because he's written over 200 papers, and he mentions all kinds of people. Go back to al-Bezdawi and see what he says as well about how he thought they did it. And there's others. I've got al-Battani. He's written from Syria. He explains the earlier method, and so do others, and we'll put that at the bottom of the screen, or for people if you want to know, or come to my website, and we've got all the bibliographies there. This method was known as the Indian Circle method. That's what it became known as later. It's described on my website, in my videos. I have videos on all of this. Now, what is interesting is that when I wanted to know how to figure out where the Qibla was, I was looking at history from back going forward. So I arrived at early Islamic history, but I started way back with the Nabateans and in Arabian history. And so when I was working through the whole Nabatean thing, they were merchants who traveled across the desert. And what gave them an edge over everyone else is that their caravans could leave an area, cross the deserts of Arabia, and arrive in another civilization.
Right.
If you remember, Mesopotamia is on one side, and then there's this great circle that goes around, and it comes down where Syria's up there, Israel is here, and Egypt is down here. And the Egyptians could not reach the Babylonians without going through all these little, civilizations around. Why was that? Because this great desert in the middle. The Nabateans developed the technology to take them across the desert to the other side. And so they were the ones who took information as well as goods in different directions and made them very, very powerful. And the Nabateans are the forerunners of were the Muslims. And so Muhammad traces his lineage all the way back through the Nabateans, going all the way back to Noah and back to Adam. And so he was, in effect, a Nabatean. He was a merchant. Khadija, whom he married, was a merchant. He took camel caravans. So Muhammad would have learned and would have observed people taking their direction from the stars and learning how to navigate using the stars. And doing this, they did what has become known, I don't know what it was known then, become known over history as the Indian Circle method. And it was quite simple. They would establish a pole. They would start by putting a pole in the ground, watching the shadow of that pole for a little while, and the
Right.
shadow moves in a straight line, and you could mark out north, south, or you could do a very quick measurement to get east and west, and you started with north, south, east, and west, and then they would calculate the place that they're going to and where they are now, and they would make just two calculations, and they would come up with the direction they were going. And that had been lost over history. And so people remembered one because they simply measured the height of the North Star. They measured it with their fingers, or later they had instruments that they could measure up, and they called those zams. And so many footsteps would move you one zam north. And so they knew how many steps moved a zam. And so they measured everything in steps, and they walked across the desert in steps. And they counted as they went. And to make counting easier, they would often tell poetry of a known length. And so as they're walking along, they're like talking away, giving this poetry. It's got rhythm. Darab, it's got the rhythm going along, and as they walk along, and they knew when they reached the end of this very long poem, they would have counted so many hundreds or thousands of steps, and then somebody else would keep up the chant, and became known. In the West, people would call them the singing caravans, because even to this day, Arabs love to chant while they are riding, the Bedouin out in the desert, and so it's just built into their background. And many of the 1001 Nights, if you go back and read the very originals coming out of the 7th and 8th century, you'll find out that they had the rhythm and they had the distance, as did the poems that come from pre-Islamic times, the hanged poems that were hanged in the Kaaba and so forth. So poetry and rhythm and everything has had a long history with the Arabs, because it was important for the merchants in tracking their steps. Once you knew your steps, you had a measurement with which you could easily calculate where you were going and how far and what direction you could get there. This was known as the Indian Circle method. I'm not describing it in this video. I have videos on my website. We go through that whole data and look at it. So there are explanations that it can be calculated. They did calculate it. Now, the one thing that was wrong with the Indian Circle method is that it did not take into calculation the curvature of the Earth.
Right.
And so the farther out you went, the more off it got. Now, we tested this to see how far do you get, and we found out that if you're standing in Jordan, and you wanted to get all the way out to Morocco, and you wanted to get that direction, you could be out as much as 10 degrees. But you would be within that accuracy if you wanted to go the other direction. And so the Indian Circle method was not perfect, But what we did, and we have put our data on the internet, something called the Qibla Tool, and we'll put that on the internet as well. It's on my website. You can go on and you can look at all of these mosques, and you can see the calculations made. We got the computer to make the calculations using spherical geometry, just like modern. And then we have the computer do the calculations using the Indian circle method. And then you can compare them and it actually explains why some mosques are out by several degrees, is because they were using the Indian circle method. It's much closer to where the mosque actually faces than to where if they had spherical geometry, which they didn't develop until Bezdawi's time and after that. So there is a method. The technology was there for them to use. It is historically noted by different historians that it existed, but they had forgotten that the Arabs could count the steps. This was something that wasn't remembered, and so the Muslims by al-Bazdawi's time, they couldn't figure out. They had the Indian, they would draw the circle, put the point in the middle, put the other things in, but they didn't know how they got to their conclusion, and that's because they had forgotten it. I first discovered it by reading Roman history, reading the Roman historians, and there you have Roman historians saying those silly Arabs, they count their steps. They knew that from down in Yemen, and they give the place Kataban in Yemen, up all the way up to Gaza was 3,650,000 steps. And that's noted all the way back in Roman times, way 500 years, 600 years previous to the rise of Islam. They knew the Arabs already then counted their steps, and they knew steps all across the desert, how far it was between all these different places by the steps that they counted. So Dr. King is going, how could they do it? You can't explain it. Well, actually, history explains it for us, how they did it, and it is perfectly possible. And so Dr. King's objections that it can't be explained, we don't know, is answered all by these early Islamic writers and even by a Roman historian who explains that it was possible for them to accurately chart across the desert. So the last question we have to ask ourselves is, if they could accurately, measure and get their qiblas right, why did they face in Africa, down in Africa? Why did the earliest ones face Petra? Why did some face a between position? And why do the others, and only a handful in the first few centuries, face Mecca in Saudi Arabia? So we've got to deal with that, and that's where people will have to come up with their own conclusions. I've developed my theory, and we're going to talk about that and people's objections to my theory, but I believe it started in Petra. And that's where Muhammad was born. That's where he was raised. That's where all these Quranic stories take place. Then the Hijrah was to Medina in the middle of Saudi Arabia. And then further, later during the Civil War or sometime during Islamic history, the Black Rock was moved farther down. Black Stone was taken down into Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And then it was kept there. And eventually Petra was destroyed in an earthquake, and people didn't face in that direction, and they faced down here. And I think we can trace those things as we look at how the mosques were built and when they were built. So Dr. King, it's random, he says, and different ways that they were doing it. And I say it was systematic, and they had the technology to do it. That's the difference between these two theories.
Absolutely, I would agree with you. And of course, his own explanation kind of like goes counters what our Muslim friends wants to tell us, that there was a lot of advancement that Islam brought into the scene, that the Muslims knew what they were doing. It's almost like while he was trying to pacify the issue, it's almost like he was denigrating really the early Islamic history in the first place when it comes to such an important ritual, and that's praying 5 times a day facing a specific direction according to the Quranic mandate. Not somebody decided to pray that way, but it was a Quranic mandate, which now it becomes an attack on Allah. Did he know what he was doing? Is he a God of confusion? And so on and so forth. So thank you so much, brother. We can't wait, of course, until we deal with the next objection in this series. Last thoughts. Anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. I think we're done with Dr. King, and we will move on now to other objections about my theory and people saying it can't be Petra because of this or it cannot be Petra because of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Until next time, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel CIRA International and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.